Hi everybody, it's Dean from Paranormal Extraction, and guess what? Zoe has allowed me to be the interviewer again today. Woo! And you wouldn't believe who I have on. Sean Straney. Oh yeah, this man, I call him Siri, because he seems to know everything. From WikiLeaks to, he's like a virtual human encyclopedia series, if you will. We're going to cover today Eugenics Part 1, the horrors of pseudoscience. Okay, we're going to cover everybody from Charles Darwin, then we're going to move into Henry Ford and how he was influenced, and then we're going to even include Hitler. This is a pretty tough topic right here. I can't wait to get started. So, everybody, I'm going to tell you, plug into your pods because this is going to be good. Rolling. Sean Straney, how you doing, sir?
I'm doing good. Thank you for having me on the show again.
You're most welcome. I can't wait to get this thing rolling. So today's show, as I spoke earlier in the introduction, is about eugenics, and Sean seems to be very, very, very informative on this subject. When we had our pre-interview, Zoe decided to have me do the interview, and I'm very excited about getting to be in front of the camera again. I hope I can be as entertaining as Zoe. So, Mr. Sean Straney is a historian, as I stated before, and he is amazing with knowledge in any kind of topic that we cover with Sean. The horrors of pseudoscience. Okay, this stuff when we spoke during the pre-interview was mesmerizing. I had no idea that it was so deep, and I actually did a bunch of extra research last night while I was just preparing for this interview, and I am absolutely just floored about the influence that. Are you? Wow. Some creature just passed in front of the camera there. We're going to live with it. Okay. All right. Mr. Sean Straney, would you please introduce yourself and let us know what credentials you have, please? And let's get started.
My name is Sean Straney. I'm a historian. I have degrees from Southern New Hampshire University in history and military history. And I have always had a very inquisitive mind. If college taught me anything, it was how to do proper research. So I'm very adamant about doing proper research and citing my sources.
Yes, you are. You are so thorough. It's amazing. During our pre-interview, I jotted down a lot of notes as we were speaking. So I had some speaking points as a good interviewer usually tries to do. Um, so now that we have you introduced, why don't you go ahead and start and get us going here and get the ball rolling and get the juices flowing.
Well, it's surprising how many people have never heard of eugenics or didn't know it was a real thing. Those people that have heard the word before, they typically associate it with episodes of Star Trek where a eugenics war allegedly took place in 1993, and it's mentioned in the show. And of course, the movie Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, Khan, Noonien, and Singh being the result of eugenics experimentation. But eugenics was a very real program that kicked off in the early 1910s and ended up actually extending all the way up almost into modern times.
Right.
And eugenics was a theory that was put forth by Francis Galton. Francis Galton was a cousin of Charles Darwin, and he came up with the idea from Darwin's research into evolution, and of course Gregor Mendel's famous experiments with crossbreeding of different types of peas and recording characteristics.
Right.
He came up with the idea that humans could be bred to be a better species. And in 1960, well, he started out with this before 1910 over in Britain. It was received with a lot of skepticism. So somewhere around 1911, he actually came over to the United States and started proposing his eugenics theories here. In 1916, he published a paper in the Columbia University Journal of Science on what eugenics was and how he backed it up. And eugenics had two components. There was positive eugenics, and that was getting people of desirable qualities to have more children, more offspring. And then there was negative eugenics, people that had undesirable qualities or were quote unquote defective,
Correct.
being sterilized and not being allowed to produce offspring.
Right. Good breeders and bad breeders. Right.
Right.
And
It was actually, he actually got funded by the Carnegie Trust, the Carnegie Foundation. They actually built him his own facility. They helped also start the Eugenics Research Office in Davenport, Iowa. And they can, even though eugenics would be eventually declared junk science, the Carnegie Foundation still continues, albeit under different grant names, to fund eugenics research.
Wow, that's right. And so they put in a lot of money to continue because the Carnegies believed that they were higher bloodline and elites. The elitists basically got involved. Once the elitists started believing in Galton's theories, they put money in it. Not just Henry Ford, but Lindbergh, if I'm not mistaken. Some of the biggest influencers are in America at that time. Isn't that what you were telling me?
Well, there are a lot of people, notable people in U.S. history that were self-professed, self-admitted eugenicists. Henry Ford was definitely one of them. Henry Ford, Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, was a eugenicist. Charles Lindbergh was a eugenicist. Lindbergh and Ford were both Nazi sympathizers. They both supported Adolf Hitler and the Third Reich. And also Henry Ford and Lindbergh were anti-Semitic.
Right.
Ford was rabidly anti-Semitic.
Oh.
He had actually published a series of pamphlets and essays, The International Jew.
Yeah.
Ford Motor Company has tried suppressing this history and whitewashing its history so it doesn't reflect bad on Ford Motor Company. But Henry Ford was
he had his own.
He was a horrible person.
He had his own newspaper that he would sort of put in people's faces because he was Henry Ford. So I had the name of it memorized, but I seem to have lost the name of it. But that doesn't matter. He would put his influence out there like propaganda, and he was able to speak on it. And because he was Henry Ford, people believed in it and read the paper like it was the word of God, if you will, because he would actually even lay his newspaper in the front seats of the automobiles that he would sell. So he would get in people's faces with that. So because of his esteem and how he was in the public, people got an earful of the eugenics, and I found that very interesting that he was able to have that kind of an impression on the American people and probably European people as well.
Well, eugenics did become a worldwide phenomenon after Francis Galton started posting his theories. However, most countries looking into it and investigating it felt that the science wasn't valid. In the United States, it was actually declared to be junk science, pseudo-science, and have no validity in 1932.
Yeah.
However, eugenics programs still continued on. And the whole thing, everybody knows about Hitler's Aryan race, blonde haired, blue eyed, physically fit, highly intelligent. That came from Francis Galton's theories of eugenics. He believed the ideal human being would have Nordic features, blonde hair, blue eyes, would be very physically fit naturally, they would be naturally athletic, and they would have very high intelligence.
Right. Yeah.
And for the people they wanted to do away with, Galton picked out people that were, the term at the time was feeble-minded, people that had epilepsy, people that had various wasting diseases like cancer.
Mm-hmm.
He felt they were polluting the human gene pool. And so he put forth this program that such people should be sterilized and not be allowed to reproduce.
Yeah. He was anti-Semitic. And just, you gave me a sort of a history on what started the anti-Semitic movement, and that was where at a certain time, I'm not sure if it was the 1920s, but when it really became a looked at situation or a fact that the Jewish people, I'm going to go ahead and say Jewish, I'm not going to use it in any derogatory fashion, but it seems that they had influence in red light districts, and they started investing their money into the red light districts, which many frowned on, and certain people of affluence, and they frowned on it, and just because they were trying to make money. Can you elaborate on that one? Because I felt that was very important, that might have been sort of the roots to not only them in controlling the money, but they also took it into a decadence. Am I correct on that?
Well, it's common knowledge that that the majority of the Jewish people in the world that were, kind of bigwigs, they invested in diamonds, they invested in banks, and there was a significant population that invested in certain red light district activities. It's estimated that in the 1920s, 1930s, 75% of the illegal and kind of underground brothels in New York City were owned by Jewish investors.
Right. That's what I was. Yes.
And this also became a serious focal point for Hitler, as we'll see when we get to that point. But Henry Ford admired what Adolf Hitler promised to do for Germany,
Mm-hmm.
bent over backwards to help him in rebuilding German industry, Germany's economy. Ford had a couple plants opened up in Germany, and he also not only did these investments with Germany and the Third Reich and Hitler, he also confirmed Adolf Hitler's belief that the Jews were responsible for everything that bad that happened in the world.
Correct.
And one of those things is that during the Great Depression, when people were looking for distractions, a large section of Berlin had become one huge red light district.
Right.
If anybody has seen the musical Cabaret,
oh yeah, that's what it was. Mm-hmm. I remember you talking.
That was what was going on in Berlin. They had these fetish clubs, cross-dressing clubs, homosexual clubs. Not that there's anything wrong with that or anything, but with if you think back in terms of the morality of the 20s, that was very taboo, and here it was right out in the open. And Hitler absolutely despised it. He considered these fetish clubs to be what helped destroy German culture.
That's what I remembered. Yeah. That
And
is
so with Henry Ford's anti-Semitic influence, Hitler shifted blame for losing World War One, for the rampant inflation that they had after World War One. Anything that plagued Germany, Hitler blamed the Jews for.
right.
And he got a real hatred of them developed over time. So when he came into power, the first thing he did was he set up these concentration camps that were basically prisons.
Yes.
And they were slave labor camps to help build the Third Reich and what would become known as Fortress Europe.
Okay.
And the first people that Hitler actually put into the concentration camps were homosexuals, gypsies, other types of sexual deviants, and quote unquote the feeble-minded.
Yeah, that's right. The
And
feeble-minded.
all these people were, when they went to the concentration camps, not only were they providing slave labor for the Third Reich machinery, they were also sterilized so they could not reproduce.
Right. They were. Oh my Lord. Yeah. So that was going on. So he was basically just trying to stop and get the perfect race. The what did he call it? The
Aryan race.
yes.
And
The Aryan. That's right.
he believed that the Aryan race and the perfect German Aryan would have Nordic features, be naturally athletic, naturally intelligent, and all this he got from Francis Galton's theories of eugenics.
Yes, I know. And that was the blonde-haired, blue-eyed thing. And when you told me of that, I just thought that just materialized as the blonde hair and blue eye was the perfect German, but that came more from a Nordic, what's the word I'm looking for? A Nordic.
It was Nordic traits.
Yes, traits.
And
thank you.
The association with that being very German came from the Middle Ages and the Teutonic Knights, because the German Empire, the Holy Roman Empire under Frederick Barbarossa, in the Middle Ages, they had Anglo-Saxons in their population. They were originally all Frankish, but they had Anglo-Saxons in their population. They had the Rus and the Vikings in their population towards the north. And they did bring in a lot of those Nordic features into their northern populations.
Correct. Yeah.
And in what would end up becoming Prussia, that trait was very common.
Right. Yes. So it even goes back to Aristotle, who saw in his own hybrid mindset that he also believed that the separation of people that were smarter and healthier, he began some of that thought process. Did he not?
Well,
Sean?
Not exactly.
No.
What we have with eugenics, as it's advanced into the modern day, is this belief that there is these globalist elites, and they're the only people that are smart enough and fit enough and rich enough to effectively run the world.
Yes.
And Aristotle actually would have been very much against that, because in his book Politics, when he talks about the leaders of society, the leaders of men, he basically, even though he used different terms at the times, he basically said the upper class was not fit to lead because they were all spoiled. They didn't play by the rules. They all, had these inheritances passed down and passed down.
Mm-hmm.
So they never had to really work for anything. They were lazy. And they believed the rules did not apply to them.
Right.
And Aristotle said also the lower class was not a good group to get the leaders of men from, because a lot of them had the criminal element, and they basically would have brought that kind of criminal element into government.
Right.
So Aristotle's belief was that uh, the crafters, the laborers, basically what would have been the middle class back in those days, were the only people uh, fit to get into positions of government.
Wow. Yes, that is what I remembered you talking about. So it goes pretty far back as far as the ideology of, like I love that word hybris because it's such a powerful word when it when it dominates uh, what takes place in the society and in civilization when a certain group of people is uh, categorized um, to be less leaders, as you say, less healthy. So it was already being looked at way back then with Aristotle, and I found
Well,
that.
If Aristotle had been alive in the 1920s, he would have very loudly and publicly denounced eugenics
Oh, he would have.
as garbage.
Oh,
Oh yeah,
really?
he would have. He would have been very much against the idea that uh, the smartest and richest people are carried by bloodlines,
Okay.
because he would have said, no, they inherit what they get.
Oh,
It's somebody,
cool.
farther back in that family made a name for themselves, like the Carnegies, the
Mm-hmm.
Vanderbilts,
Mm-hmm.
the Gettys, the Rockefellers.
Yeah.
And everybody benefits from that, but they also believe because they grew up with that privilege that they don't have to play by the rules, that they are just naturally fit to be the people that dictate society.
Right.
Uh,
Okay.
very, very interesting comment by Edward Bernays on propaganda, and he even says this in his book, Propaganda, is that democracy is administered by the uh, I'm going to paraphrase here because I won't get the quote exactly right, but he goes, democracy is administered by the intelligent few that know how to guide and regiment the masses.
Okay. Well, with that quote right there.
Go.
Okay, so Edward Bernays, he talked about the elites. So, and let's jump it up. Let's pick it back up past him, and let's pick it up to where in 1930s and then up to 1932, you were telling me how eugenics had moved in to the thought process of reducing people like no imbeciles and weak minds and feeble-minded people. Take off from there for me, if you would, please.
Well, in 1932, like I said, eugenics was officially declared to be junk science, a pseudoscience, in the United States by the United States scientific community. And it happened. This also happened in a lot of other countries.
Mm-hmm.
However, eugenics persisted on, and actually, we can trace this all the way up to modern times.
Yes.
And one of the first things that they did was they began opening up um, schools, which were really asylums for the feeble-minded.
Right.
And the feeble-minded was a term that covered people that were just basically slow, all the way up to people that were mentally handicapped. Of course, we didn't have such an understanding of mental handicaps like we do now. We didn't have, the understanding of Mongolism and other genetic disorders. But, the feeble-minded were considered the wrong people to reproduce. So when they had these schools, these asylums, and in part two, we'll really delve into Pennhurst,
Yeah.
which was one of them.
Yes, definitely.
Families were basically started dumping off, these weak children, whether they were weak-minded, whether they were physically weak, they had any kind of birth defects, any kind of deformities, and these eugenics asylums were very rapidly overpopulated. To give you an example of how eugenics was practiced to the modern day, Pennhurst Asylum wasn't shut down until 1976.
Man, they were still rolling with it, still sending
Oh yeah.
and selecting people. Uh, Definitely selecting people all the way across America. You were telling me how people would, certain people would judge and go into the hillbilly areas and start selecting people out of states and to
Oh,
reduce the
and
yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
In West Virginia, in the hillbilly communities way up in the mountains. Now, you know, these people are not dumb. They just lead a very simple life, living with the land in their small, isolated communities. Uh, I mean, it would be about the same to call them dumb because they have a different lifestyle, as it would be saying, well, the Amish don't use technology, so they're all dumb.
Hmm.
And I think everybody knows better. Uh, I mean, the Amish produce some of the, you know, the finest handcrafted furniture in the world. Um, just by way of example, well, these hillbillies that lived in West Virginia in these, you know, mountain communities, okay, you know, they could take a vehicle that the body would be rusting around it, and they could take apart those engines, rebuild them, and keep that vehicle running ad infinitum.
Yeah.
You know, 500,000 miles on these vehicles.
Yeah.
So they weren't stupid.
No, they were not.
Also, just because of observation, living, you know, on with the land and everything, they could just have a look at the what kind of day it was and be able to predict the weather for the next 3 days as good as any modern day meteorologist with all the computer models.
Right. They were
So
amazing.
they weren't stupid at all.
And they're still amazing.
However, uh, a lot of counties in West Virginia, the sheriffs would go up into these communities. They would get children that were in late adolescence, you know, they would be like in their mid teens to late teens. And they'd say, and they would go up there with the equivalent of, you know, the welfare offices or, you know, human services, whatever. And they'd say, hey, we're just going to bring you into town to see the doctor and get a checkup and make sure you're okay. And so they would go into town. They had, you know, school buses or vans. They'd bring them into town,
Right.
take them to see the doctor, and the doctor would always find something, a reason to do a procedure, and they were without consent and without knowledge involuntarily sterilized so they could not reproduce.
Yeah. That is
That continued up until documented that continued up until the early 80s.
right. Oh my lord. Yeah. So and up until the early '80s, they were still conducting this without the consent of the people of America. Let's just keep it in America. I don't know how far or how in depth it went into Europe at the same time with the thought process. I don't think we covered that. How if Europe was also taking part in anything like this. Obviously, we were very
Well,
interested in it.
the shame of Nazi Germany had pretty much shut down things that Europe was doing as far as eugenics because,
Oh,
in fact, the reason people don't say feeble minded anymore is because feeble minded became so associated with Nazi Germany, it became a dirty word.
yeah,
And actually, sociologists and psychologists invented a word that would take its place in the late 40s, moron. Moron's not a real word, it's
oh,
a made up word.
okay. Okay, by eugenics enthusiasts, influencers,
Well, no,
basically. No,
it was
it's
just
just a.
a made up word
Oh, okay.
because feeble minded became a dirty word.
Yeah.
But of course, you know, as moron became an insult, they said, well, now let's say mentally retarded, which
Okay.
means to be mentally slowed down or
Mm-hmm.
mentally set back.
Right.
And that became an insult in the 60s and 70s. So they
Yeah.
said, well, we can't say that. So, you know, words, the evolution of the terminology is always when something becomes an insult, well, now it's a dirty word, you can't say it anymore. But feeble minded was associated with the horrors of Nazi Germany.
Right, when they would have their Lebensborn programs for the blonde hair and blue eyed babies production
Oh yeah,
type of.
the positive eugenics, as I mentioned, uh, one of the programs they had in Germany was the Lebensborn,
Mm-hmm.
and the whole process with that is they were giving uh, blonde-haired, blue-eyed women to have kids with SS officers, and then these children would be taken to these massive nurseries and basically raised by the state, eventually, adopted out to good German parents.
Yes.
But it was a process to accelerate having, having the Aryan population in Germany.
Right.
And this was a program designed both by Himmler and Hitler.
Yes. That's where they really put it in. They really put it into third gear right there. So yeah. So you were talking about, let's just call them the hillbillies. They were simple. They were functioning
Yeah,
just like
they're
the.
not stupid.
No.
They
No.
just live a very simple lifestyle. They have their own culture, their own
Mm-hmm.
music, all that. But of course, because they did not live a technical lifestyle, something that was up with technology, they were
Right.
considered stupid.
Yeah. Because they
One
were.
program that still persists today that was born out of eugenics is Planned Parenthood.
Yes, that's where I was going to take you next because that started developing. When did that get developed? Was that late '80s or what time did
Oh
Planet?
no, Margaret Sanger developed
Mm-hmm.
that uh, in the 30s, I
Oh
believe.
yes, that's correct. I see that right here in
She
my notes.
began, yeah, she began found that foundation. Now, Margaret Sanger is often accused of being a racist because all her abortion clinics were always located in these inner cities.
Oh yeah,
But
that's
if you actually go through speeches that she gave, talks that she gave at universities, et cetera, she was not racist by any means. This is more like a kind of coincidental thing. She believed that poverty was a genetic defect. A proclivity towards poverty was a genetic defect.
okay.
So she wanted people that lived in the slums in the inner cities to have this option to abort children, to have contraceptives, to be voluntarily sterilized if they wanted to be, so that poor people would quit breeding. In a lot of her talks, Margaret Sanger was very much against the welfare state, was against programs like Medicare, as we know them today, Medicare and Medicaid.
Yes.
She didn't believe that the poor should get any help at all. The resources would be better served funding programs of,
Develop.
basically the smarter and the better people.
Okay.
So her whole thing with Planned Parenthood was an effort to get uh, people she believed that had a proclivity towards poverty to stop breeding.
Correct. So that is a very, very important stage in America's history for sure because we're still battling that. Roe versus Wade, we overturned that just recently. I'm sure that case had something to do with the same thought process back when it was established, when it became a law. Correct?
Well, Roe versus Wade, and there were people that supported a woman's right to choose on the Supreme Court, but even they agreed that the foundation of the argument for Roe versus Wade was faulty constitutionally.
Oh,
And all overturning Roe versus Wade did was, in fact, Ruth Bader Ginsburg,
yes,
very, very much supported the idea of being allowed to have abortions.
yes.
And she argued against Roe versus Wade because she said it was faulty constitutional law.
Uh huh.
And all the overturning of Roe versus Wade did was, instead of it eliminated it as a federal statute and turned the power of whether abortion should be allowed or not back over to the states.
Right.
It didn't
It took.
suddenly stop abortion,
Mm-hmm.
as is commonly said.
Yeah, it just took it back to the state level instead of federal, which I believe was kind of a good move personally, because
In fact, in one of Ruth Bader Ginsburg's speeches at Stanford Law School, she said that the right to privacy was the flaw of the argument. We do have a right to be safe from search and seizure without a warrant, but we do not have a right to privacy. And one of the cases that she cited in arguing that was, well, then the espionage charges against the Rosenbergs for the nuclear spying for Russia, they could have said, well, they had a right to privacy and they made a private sale of information to Russia. They didn't do it publicly, therefore you can't prosecute them. And she said, if you took the right to privacy to, to that extreme, the way Roe v. Wade was argued, then you wouldn't have been able to charge the Rosenbergs with espionage.
So somehow, yes, of course, that was all backed up by the thought process of stronger people, smarter people, back to the choices made where Planned Parenthood stepped in, and then all the way up to now, and even in 2007 with A.G. Winfield's, the doctor of sociology, didn't he write a book, or was that his thought process towards us?
I got to grab my notes. I forgot we had talked about it.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
Oh no, he was discussing education.
Oh, he was. Okay.
Yeah, A.G. Winfield in 2007, he said, in modern education, the rewarding of the wealthy and the punishing of the poor and the weak remains intact.
So there, it still continued.
And this is through the education system.
Right.
Basically, for the people that are poor, that go to these inner city public schools, a lot less effort is put into educating them, allowing them to break that poverty cycle.
Correct. So, and then that all ties back. That all ties back to the thought processes of Henry Ford and his good buddy Charles Lindbergh, and all those people.
Well, yeah, Charles Lindbergh was a big supporter of Hitler. Hitler was actually hoping that Charles Lindbergh would be a German fifth column in the United States because Charles Lindbergh was against going to war in Europe.
Yeah. So he was trying to establish that in America and get his ideologies, because he was tied strongly to Lindbergh and also to Henry Ford. And that's right here in America. And so,
yeah,
they were.
Yeah, it's called, Max Wallace in his book calls it the American Axis.
Yes.
But some quotes by eugenicists, and of course everybody knows George Bernard Shaw. There's that famous video where he talks about the useless eaters, the people that consume way more than they produce.
Yes.
Well, Shaw was a racist, a socialist, and a eugenicist.
Oh.
And this is a direct quote from George Bernard Shaw, the famous playwright. Unless the socialist is a eugenicist as well, the socialist state will speedily perish from racial degradation.
Yes. Yes. And
in 1934, in Britain, the English National Council of Labor Women, and of course we all know that the Labor Party is very socialist over there, adopted a resolution that defectives, quote unquote defectives, be sterilized. And they were trying to get Parliament, the British Parliament, to adopt this resolution because the practice was already legal in Denmark, Norway, and Sweden, where people that had significant birth defects were immediately sterilized.
Yeah. So where are we at? Where are we at to modern day? Because 2015 there was active lawsuits that were going on.
Right.
Tubes tied.
This was some research I did several years ago, and I remember I was looking up And it's when I first actually began realizing eugenics was something very real, a very real history, and not just a term from, a science fiction TV show. I was doing some research. In 2015, there were 3 active lawsuits by minority women against the California penal system for having undergone tubal ligation without their consent and without their knowledge.
Right. To try to.
And these were women that were in the prison system, and they had to have some other procedure, maybe an appendectomy, whatever, anything that required them to go under the knife. And while they were under the knife, they went ahead and did a tubal ligation without their consent and without their knowledge. If they got out on good behavior, got out on parole, and they wanted to try and have a respectable life, start a family, they can't get pregnant. They go to their OBGYN and it's, well, your tubes were tied while you were in prison.
Right.
And they had no knowledge of it.
Exactly. So from there, we're going to try to close this up to where are we today in your opinion? Where are we with the whole thought process of eugenics right now?
Well, eugenics is not openly practiced. It's not considered a real science. However, the ideas behind it, that there are superior people that should be running the world, is very obviously still a thing. The fact that Planned Parenthood is still active in the inner cities is a leftover from eugenics. When we get into part 2, we'll see how eugenics asylums continued up into the 1970s and created some of the most haunted sites in America.
Yes. We're going to take that. We're going to go there with
eugenics is not considered a science to be studied anymore, but it is still pursued. The Carnegie Foundation still actually has endowments that go towards what they call now genetic hygiene.
Okay.
So it has not gone away. It's still very quietly practiced up until the modern day.
Of course. Wow. So I think we pretty much hit on all the notes that I've taken and all the hot topics, if you will, on this in this show right now.
It's an interesting thing that when Francis Galton came up with the term eugenics, of course you have genics relating to genes.
Yes.
And then eu came from a Greek word for good. So eugenics was the study of good genes,
right,
in Francis Galton's worldview.
Awesome. So how do you feel about it? You think we've covered pretty much everything up to now, Sean? And I'm really excited about this show because this is a topic I think some people live, but they don't want to know about it. And some people know that the elites are still running the world. So I kind of wanted to build up to that and their thought processes towards, poor Americans, say like Biden even saying, poor kids are just as smart as white kids. It still lives for a standing, of somebody who's running for president is going to say some kind of a topic.
Yeah, and also when he was a senator and he opposed the forced busing resolution, like what was going on in Boston, and this is all over the internet. It's public domain. He said that forced integration would create a racial jungle in our schools.
Yes. See?
So Biden was much more of a racist type eugenicist, if he even knows what eugenics is. Because
correct.
I sometimes wonder. I sometimes wonder how much of what he says, and even what he used to say on Meet the Press with Tim Russert when he was a senator, how much is original ideas and how much is parroting to pander to his base.
Correct. So, perfect. That's where we're sitting right now. In part 2 of this, we're going to take it into the, the horrific places that are haunted now because of their movement of people into the buildings or the insane asylums, if you will. That's where we're going to take part 2, ladies and gentlemen. Do you have
Yeah,
anything
if it
to?
weren't for eugenics, we would not have so many great paranormal sites to investigate as we do now.
Yeah. So I can't wait to get then and unravel and and talk about those places because I think we've really hit on it. So to to find you, you're going to start throwing some things onto Rumble pretty soon. Some of your knowledge onto Rumble, your conspiracies and your conspiracy theories and your historian work that you're doing recently. Am I not mistaken?
I am looking at putting together PowerPoint presentations on significant historical events and
Cool.
uploading them to Rumble. It's going to be a purely historical channel.
Nice.
One of the first things that I would like to cover is the Latin American interventions, namely Guatemala and Chile.
Okay. Cool. So in the meantime, I guess
I do have an active Substack. My Substack is called A Different Outlook.
Okay.
And that covers a variety of things from, current events to historical events. I actually just posted an analysis of Dwight D. Eisenhower's farewell speech, in that I believe that once he found out how the Dulles brothers had deceived him into getting involved in the Guatemalan intervention to overthrow Arbenz,
Well,
that he came to regret that, and that's what triggered his unwarranted influence comments in his farewell address.
wow, amazing. So maybe we can talk about that, some of your topics. So in the meantime, how do we find you on that? What, just Sean Straney at, is that,
Well, it's the Substack. Just
yes.
search a different viewpoint.
Okay.
It's easy to find me, and
Okay.
also when I do publish a new Substack or anything like that, I post it on my Facebook. My
Okay.
Facebook is under my real name, Sean Straney.
Okay, great.
And
Awesome.
I regularly, if I post something on something like Substack or Rumble, I share it a couple times that day on my Facebook page.
Wonderful. Well, taking that in account, we're gonna say goodbye and we're gonna gear up for show 2, part 2 of eugenics and the horrors of and hauntings of what do you call them? Insane asylums, if you will. We'll keep it simple like that. Um, so, Sean, I would like to say Auf Wiedersehen. Is that an appropriate term? And
Sure it is. Thank you very much for having me on, and I'm looking forward to delving into the paranormal aspects of eugenics in part 2.
Awesome. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you for watching.